Between 1970 and 1974, tens of millions of Americans watched each week as they tracked the exploits of television's most tuneful clan. The Partridge Family was more than your run-of-the-mill sitcom. It was a pop culture phenomenon that spawned #1 records, brought teenage heartthrobs to international attention, and encapsulated early 1970s pop culture. When America itself was struggling through Vietnam, Watergate, and social upheaval, the Partridges' bright colors, happy tunes, and down-home family harmony provided an escape into something simpler, safer, and commercially exploitable forever. Behind the grins, the harmonies, and the acid psychedelic bus, however, lay secrets far more complicated and sometimes darker than anything that appeared before the cameras. Now, we can finally strip away the carefully built facade to expose what David Cassidy, Shirley Jones, Danny Bonaduce, Susan Dey, and other stars later revealed after years of guarded restraint. Their disclosures reveal the acrimonious music industry fights raging behind those seamless-seeming performances, the heartbreaking personal ills concealed behind those idealized smiles, and the corporate manipulation that transformed young performers into highly packaged commodities. Perhaps most astonishing of all, the television's most wholesome musical family was actually brought together through one of television's most cynical casting procedures ever. For viewers who believed they knew the Partridge Family, the reality is both enlightening and somber. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. The first and perhaps most astonishing revelation is that television's most renowned musical family wasn't actually a musical family at all. The series was a carefully crafted advertising idea created from scratch to cash in on the popularity of actual-life family bands. Television historian Tim Brooks discussed that the show wasn't motivated by creative vision, but by economic calculation. The executives at ABC had observed the chart success of real family band the Cowsills with several late 1960s hits and wished they had one of their own, something they could totally control. Initially, the idea was to hire the Cowsills as actors, but the network acknowledged that an actual family band would be hard to handle. They didn't want independent artists. They wanted pliable performers who could be molded into saleable images. Shirley Jones, the mother, has since described how consciously this was done. Rather than casting actors who could sing or musicians who could act, the casting was solely based on who photographed well and could move product, that is, magazine covers, posters, and records. David Cassidy recalled his audition clearly, not for his singing or guitar playing, but because of how executives analyzed his looks and determined he could be shaped into the teen idol they envisioned. Cassidy himself was a serious musician with dreams of being recognized for his craftsmanship. He played guitar, composed songs, and had already played in bands. But once he arrived on the show, he soon realized they didn't care what he thought. They wanted Keith Partridge, a teen romance-packaged image of bubblegum innocence. The manufactured quality of the show came through most clearly in the music. Danny Bonaduce, who portrayed wisecracking Danny Partridge, has since confessed that he had never played a bass before he was hired. Like the others, he was just acting. David Cassidy and Shirley Jones were the only cast members to actually perform on the discs. All of the other music was by veteran studio players, mostly from the fabled Wrecking Crew, the same crew that worked with the Beach Boys and the Monkees. Even Susan Dey, when she devoted herself to studying keyboard, rehearsing for hours, and becoming very proficient, was forbidden to play on the discs. It was humiliating for her, a reminder that truthfulness wasn't in the equation. The show's #1 hit, I Think I Love You, was a prime example. Composed by Tony Romeo, it was specifically crafted to be popular with preteens and teens. The adolescent romantic insecurity was captured in the lyrics as the production provided the illusion of a family band, when in fact it was professional studio wizardry. Even the harmonies weren't what fans thought. Except for David and Shirley, most of the layered vocals were sung by professional vocalists, not the children. As music historian Charlotte Gregg explained, when fans thought they were hearing the entire family sing as one, they were actually listening to a mix of seasoned session vocalists. The illusion carried over to images. The iconic Partridge Family bus was not some whimsical creative touch. Production designer Bruce Bushman confessed it was selected after children in focus groups reacted to psychedelic images and vibrant colors. It was filtered counterculture, made safe and family-friendly. Costume designer Nolan Miller later came forward and confessed the coordinating velvet suits and ruffled shirts were also conceived through research. They were hip enough to appear up-to-date, but cleaned up enough to reassure parents concerned about the impact of rock culture on kids. From the start, this wasn't television, it was a multimedia business. The first album had been recorded before the pilot episode aired. It was a planned scheme in which the show publicized the music advertised the show, and both advertised merchandise. Lunchboxes, dolls, board games, trading cards, and posters were already in production before any filming started. The performers were as much commodities as they were artists. Few carried this burden more heavily than David Cassidy. Almost overnight, he was one of the best-known young men on the planet. His picture was on bubblegum cards, cereal boxes, and lunchboxes. His concerts attracted tens of thousands of screaming fans, sometimes to perilous consequence. Cassidy mania dwarfed even Elvis Presley or the Beatles at their height in sheer fan club membership. He was getting 25,000 fan letters a week. Girls invaded his house, tore his clothes, and followed his car. At one time, police pleaded with him not to get out of cars because they were unable to handle crowds. The fame, however, was crushing. Cassidy said it felt like he existed inside a glass box, applauded and loved, but in a cage. He couldn't walk down the street, he couldn't date normally, and most painfully, he couldn't develop as an artist. He wanted to write, to try his hand at rock music, to evolve past bubblegum pop, but the network and record label kept reminding him that he was contractually obligated to stay Keith Partridge. Even his haircuts and wardrobe were dictated. I wasn't playing Keith Partridge, he recalled. I was Keith Partridge 24 hours a day, whether I wanted to be or not. The breaking point occurred at a concert at the London White City Stadium in 1974. The crowd exceeded capacity. Fans pushed towards the barriers, being trampled. A 14-year-old girl was killed, and hundreds were injured. David was shaken. "It isn't music anymore," he cried. "It's hysteria." Soon he retired from touring. The tragedy had a turning point. For Cassidy, fame that had once seemed like magic now felt like a cage. Behind the scenes, cast member relationships were all over the place. Shirley Jones, a seasoned star in real life, attempted to bring stability. She and David, her actual stepson in real life, had an on-again, off-again but real relationship. For the younger children, experiences ranged from helpful to problematic. Danny Bonadus's family life was abusive and fraught and left him battered and traumatized. He eventually confessed the set was escape and confusion. He was acting a naughty but charming boy while secretly suffering. Adults on the set sensed issues, but at that time, little could be done. Shirley Jones attempted to aid by providing him with time at her home. Susan Day, on the other hand, also had her own battles. She was very private, having gone from modeling into acting, and grappled with body issues that were exacerbated by producer feedback. She portrayed on-screen confidence as a young woman, but frequently wrestled with insecurities. Brian Forster and Susan Crow, who was the youngest, were somewhat outside the family circle, treated less as siblings and more like scenery players in an advertising assembly line. The reality is that the cast was not a family. They were co-workers united by corporate dictate. All of the interviews they did were scripted with sanctioned stories about how close they were as a group. Publicists went to great lengths to conceal David's fatigue, Danny's bruises, and Susan's tensions. The veneer of accord had to be maintained. The music industry machine that supported the Partridge Family was merciless. David had virtually no creative input, despite being the sole true musician within the cast. Executives selected songs for optimal commercial viability with teenage girls. Lyrics were written by middle-aged men to emulate adolescent feelings. Cassidy routinely had to learn songs ad hoc, record them rapidly, and be finished with them during recording sessions. Session vocalists were occasionally doubled over his voice in order to produce a richer sound, something which unsettled him greatly. Financially, the setup was exploitative. Millions in sales meant Cassidy and Jones received only union scale for recordings and barely any royalties. Child performers such as Bonaduce and Day received none of the merchandising revenue, even though their likenesses sold millions of lunchboxes and trading cards. Contracts had granted the studio complete rights to their images, which were promotional, even as they earned millions of dollars. For the cast of youngsters, the psychological cost was staggering. Bonaduce recently explained how weird it used to be to have his face staring back from pajamas and board games when he had no say over how he was represented. Cassidy said he couldn't shop without being reminded that he was merchandise. The ubiquity of their own images made self and product irretrievably blur together. When the show ended in 1974, it had left behind a legacy both triumphant and tragic. For Shirley Jones, it was a role she could nostalgically look back on, but for Cassidy, it was a brand he could never shake. He spent decades attempting to establish himself as a serious actor and musician, but audiences couldn't get beyond Keith Partridge. His subsequent alcoholism, financial struggles, and health issues were a testament to the